Hey gang, Professor Feeser here, and on today's episode, we're going to talk about GitHub's container registry, or GitHub's container repository, the GitHub package index, as it relates specifically to Docker and containers. You can push anything that follows a Docker v2 specification or anything that follows the Open Container Initiative specification into it. If you join me on github.com/RZFeeser/simplefastservice, I can show you an example of what I mean. Scroll down about a quarter of the way. And here you can see packages. And below that, Simple Flask service. I clicked on packages. And right there's the Simple Flask service. If I click on that, you can see it's advertising a couple different ways to get to it. Here's a tag. Here's another tag, main, and it links back to the repository we came from, Simple Flask service there. So what this is ultimately a place to, after your app has been built into a Docker container, push the resultant image to. So other folks don't have to build it. They can just yank it down and use it, say, in like automation or workflows. The best way to get an image into there is through a GitHub workflow. And before we hop to that, I just want to point out that GitHub has some pretty good documentation on what we're going to talk about in this video and beyond. We're not going to touch on everything, but specifically working with the container registry. Review this if you need a deep dive into how all of this works. If we go into .github/workflows back in the Simple Flask service repository, you'll see there's two files. That's at least two jobs, we would assume. The one we want to look at is Docker build and publish. This job starts off with some metadata, and then the triggers are described. Workflow dispatch is a button press. Push would be a trigger, like a change to a branch. Now, specifically, the only branch we want to watch changes to is main. And we want to ignore README file and also the GitHub directory. So if changes happen to those two, or anywhere readme.markdown file, or anything in our workflow directory, don't trigger our workflow. Otherwise, it will. Any other files will change it. I have an env, so these are environmental variables. They're going to simply be set in our runtime. In this case, Ubuntu latest is Ubuntu 24.04 LTS. That's called our runner. GHCRIO is the identifier for the GitHub container registry or repository. Here, this is a context. It's like a variable that always reflects some information. So that's just, we're passing it to image name. Simply whatever it's set to in this repository, we're setting to image name. Here's our job. We only have one job. Permissions are permissions related to the token. If you go look at that GitHub page I showed you a moment ago, it will speak about how you should set token permissions to be able to read or write, push, delete from the container registry. Steps. If we look here, the hyphens are the number of steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And these steps are going to be evaluated consecutively. So this is the 0th step or first step. This is the next step. This is the next step. Right? It's one after the next. The first step uses a thing called a action, a GitHub action. And an action is a set of code that's already written for us, describes for us how it simplifies, it abstracts a series of steps for us. So we don't have to describe, in this case, a clone command. The clone's just taken care of for us. The next one, Docker login action. actually logs us into a Docker image repository. And the way this is set up is actually completely copy-pastable into, say, your own workflow. It would work. This action, when paired with that context, and this is actually a context as well, or it's a value you don't have to set. It'll be automatically created for you in the workflow. Will push to the GitHub container registry that we've been speaking about. That's our second action. Third action prepares metadata. So unless you want to change the way your image is named and ultimately tagged, that's copy-pastable. Build and push Docker image. So this build and push action, I pulled this marketplace step up. And I know it's called marketplace. You're not paying for anything here. This, again, it's just code that we can reference. And it's an abstraction of a series of steps. In this case, it's a build and then ultimately a push to wherever we're logged into. In this case, the GitHub container registry. If you wanted to see who made it, or if Docker, verifies the creator or the code itself, you can review it. But that's inside the GitHub marketplace. You can check that out. The last one is a security step. It builds a unique name and assigns it that we can use for ultimately, if we were going to have like a workflow where we deployed into production, we might want to use such a name to verify the same image was running that was actually produced from a particular workflow. All right, so that's what happens if we want to see that running and we want to see a new image get pushed out. We can do that. We'll go into actions and I'm going to select that particular workflow. Workflow dispatch event trigger is a button press. So we're going to focus on main. We're going to run that workflow as is. That entire workflow is copy-pastable. If you wanted to try this out on your own code, you absolutely could. I don't believe there's anything unique or anything else beyond copying the contents of that file into your own repository to start playing around with containerizing code as well as pushing it to the image repo. This probably takes about 45 seconds. Oh, in this case, 21 seconds. It's already done. All the steps passed. If I go back to the home page for the project, if I look at this particular package, we should see actually that just a minute ago, I had 2 new images published to the package index here on GitHub. Wow, who knew working with the GitHub container registry was so simple? All of that copy and paste code is available from the simple Flask service repository. Additionally, the 2 links that we saw on the documentation to working with the container registry, as well as building and pushing Docker images, the marketplace action, I'm going to link those down below near the comment section. You can also find my contact information. I'm a trainer, and if you need help for yourself or an organization, I'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, hit like, hit subscribe. I'll see you in the next episode of Code with Feeser.